Well, thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction, Alistair. Thank you very much to SSERC. Thank you to you all for being here. It really is a pleasure to be here. I owe so much to SSERC. It goes right back to days teaching science in some of Orkney's smaller island schools. Early on, I found a SSERC newsletter about making a seawater aquarium. So in various schools we got a tank and an air pump, and we went to the shore for mussels to filter the water. We had whelks and sea anemones, and one day after a storm I found a sea mouse. Oops, that's it, back there, that's it there. A sea mouse. It's actually not a mouse, it's a worm. The hollow bristles on its back look like mouse hairs. But it turned out that we were rediscovering a joy from the mid-19th century, and that's where this lady comes in. She's the lady who developed the first seawater aquarium. It's Anna Thynne in England, wife of the Sub-Dean of Westminster Abbey and mother of 10 children. She became interested in sea creatures in rock pools when taking the family to the seaside, and in the winter of 1847 visitors streamed into Westminster Abbey to see the tanks where she kept and bred various species. That's a book about her life. Now, what she was doing was a classic example of how to make science accessible to everyone. But as the 19th century progressed, the situation changed. The idea that ordinary people could develop science for us all to enjoy was replaced with a more austere one. The amateur naturalist who enjoyed studying living creatures was replaced by the professional scientist who dissected dead ones and who spoke in marbled halls to which the public would come with a sense of duty and humility. This was typified by annual meetings, for example, of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. The meetings were for members only. They took place each year in a different university, and the programme was drawn up in separate sections for physics, chemistry, and so on by committees of leading people in each field. Now, this was doing a great deal for science, but it was a meeting really of scientists for scientists. It wasn't so much for the public. It was not so much bringing science to the public as bringing the public to science. And there's a picture from one of the meetings. But then, in the late 1980s, something started to happen in Edinburgh and in Glasgow. A furious storm in January 1968 had damaged a vast number of Glasgow's tenement houses and triggered a massive programme of repair and regeneration. The city's new look brought it the Garden Festival of 1988, and then in 1990 the accolade of European City of Culture. You can imagine the feeling in Edinburgh on discovering that suddenly, in the matter of culture, Glasgow was indeed miles better. But Edinburgh had also started to regenerate. For long, the city's brownfield sites had been seen as a problem, since the city council lacked the money to redevelop them. But a lively group of councillors and officials was coming to the fore, particularly in the Economic Development Department. The head there, Bill Ross, had previously managed land for British Rail, and he knew that if you have land, the rest follows. You can bring in property developers and pension fund investors to do the actual development. The ownership is the key starting point. And so Edinburgh's brownfield sites changed from being a problem to an exciting opportunity. And the city began a momentum that has brought it a conference centre, a finance centre, South Gyle, and much else that continues today. So when Glasgow took the cultural accolade, Edinburgh didn't complain. Instead, it took stock of its wonderful scientific past and present, and its new developments for the future, and it decided to rebrand as a city of science. To highlight the transformation, Bill Ross's assistant director, Ian Wall, who was leading the way with the transformation of the city, came up with the idea of a new type of festival. Edinburgh was known worldwide for its Autumn Arts Festival, so therefore, he said, it should create a new type of festival in the spring to represent the new image of the city, and this would be a science festival. So, just over 30 years ago, in April 1989, with some late flakes of snow fluttering around St Giles Cathedral, outside it was Mr. Boom, the one-man band from the moon with a lampshade hat, singing a song about the planets of the solar system, with very small and very well wrapped up children joining in, and some very well wrapped up mothers as well. And there at the Botanic Gardens was the Dome of Discovery, with a wealth of hands-on activities and tours of the glass houses at various times of day. Other departments in the city helped, particularly the tourist department, which managed to bring Alan Shepard, the American, one of the few people who had landed on the moon, who had hit a golf ball on the moon, came to Scotland to hit a golf ball there. And somebody else found out that there was a World Robot Table Tennis Playing Championship, and the robot table tennis players were brought as well, and in the situations vacant, an advert was put in to recruit a Scottish robot to take part and represent Scotland in the championships. But it wasn't easy. Many people in advance of this doubted whether such a thing was possible. Could it really be possible, they asked, that something as serious as science, where dedicated people went to serious lectures, could something like this be presented with the sparkle and enjoyment of an arts or a music festival? A market research company had been appointed to interview key people in science and technology. It found some, particularly younger ones, keen to be involved, but others were deeply sceptical. Here are some of the quotes. "We would not want to be associated," you could almost hear the voice, "to be associated with anything like that. Science is a serious business. I just don't understand the concept. Edinburgh is an arts-based city. The gulf between the arts and science is just too wide." And it should, in fairness, be said that some of those quoted subsequently became some of the festival's most enthusiastic supporters. And one sign that it was going to work was when the National Museum in Chambers Street's lecture theatre was packed full for lunchtime talks on subjects like the new science of chaos and on climate change. And there was an evening lecture in the Botanic Gardens about archaeological work in the island of Rum. The archaeologists had found there fragments of pottery with traces of plant residues which looked like remnants from an ancient beer, something like 5,000 years old. Heriot-Watt University's Professor of Brewing kindly agreed to try to recreate it for the audience to sample at the end of the talk. The audience showed at the end of the talk, at first, a slight degree of what might be called Edinburgh caution. And then, as the glasses were refilled and oatcakes and cheese passed round, they developed a wonderful buzz of conversation and interest and enjoyment, and that was the moment when it became clear that a science festival was possible in both theory and practice. Now, this is the point. It's not what you do that makes a festival, it's how you do it. You take, for instance, a talk on an interesting subject, but you put it in a context that makes it a total experience, and you create a freshness and a vitality. That's something that the world of the arts knows about. You could go to an early music festival, for instance, like the one in York. You'll find concerts in atmospheric venues, sometimes in the cathedral there, sometimes in a small country church by the light of hundreds of candles. Sometimes before a concert there might be a talk about the composer, and it might include some pieces of food from their country or their time. It's the total experience. And as the Science Festival concept has spread from Scotland around the world, various places have added their own distinctive touches. The Gothenberg Science Festival, that's it, the Gothenberg Science Festival, that was developed by Annika Lotzman Dahl. Her background is in arts festivals. And so in the Gothenberg, she would follow, say, a talk on polar exploration with a concert of music on Arctic-inspired themes. In Genoa, a city of beautiful historic houses, the owners make them available for special events in the Genoa Science Festival, including the closing party for helpers. And then we have that picture, got it there, that's the World Science Festival, and it really does deserve its title. It was developed by actor Alan Alda, you remember in MASH, and string theorist Brian Greene. Alan Alda has a deep love of science, a deep interest, and this wonderful ability to liaise with people with different scientific backgrounds and bring out the very best form of presentation. And this is an example where they brought in the singer Bobby McFerrin in a classic event. It's on YouTube with millions of views. He taught an audience to sing a pentatonic scale by jumping from one point to another on the stage to mark the individual notes. And amazingly, the audience hit them absolutely right. Edinburgh Science Festival, of course, has gone from strength to strength over the years under the leadership of Simon Gage. It's absolutely brilliant to see what they've done and what Simon and his team have done. They've nurtured so many new ideas and formats for events. This is one from one of the earlier ones, the wonderful Mad Lab, developed early on by Hugh Jones of the Royal Observatory of Edinburgh, with children, and sometimes very small ones, soldering electronic circuits to make working units. I actually saw a child with the parent of 4 years old soldering a working circuit. In more recent years, there's another lovely development, the human body mock-up, and you see teams of very small people in white surgical gowns, and they work with great care and commitment, and there's really just a wealth of ideas that they have developed over the years. The first area to follow Edinburgh was Orkney, and this came about through tourism. It's interesting, it was economic development that drove that first festival in Edinburgh, and in Orkney it was tourism, because Orkney Tourist Board had noticed the success of the Isle of Man in developing all year round tourism by spreading festivals around the calendar. Orkney's tourist season 50 years ago was about 6 weeks in July and August, but gradually the Tourist Board applied this principle and developed festivals and expanded the tourist season. They did so with an arts festival, the St Magnus Festival, then a folk festival, and they saw the opportunity that a science festival would provide. Now, Orkney on paper was about the last place you would think which would follow Edinburgh, because of course it was far away from universities and research centres. But there was technology in its North Sea oil terminal, and its stone circles showed a tradition of astronomy going back 5,000 years. At the first Orkney Science Festival in 1991, there were good turnouts for the evening talks, but much less through the day. But over the years the numbers have grown. Today a talk, whether at 10 in the morning or 3:30 in the afternoon, can in some situations attract up to 200 people. Everything about a science festival event is shaped for accessibility. So, for example, venues for Orkney events include the 12th century St Magnus Cathedral. That's a concert there with science-related readings. Venues include this one, Scale House, 17th century house, with a talk upstairs in the drawing room and a themed tea in the dining room downstairs. There's an evening boat trip to the island of Hoy to take in talks in the Hoy Kirk on subjects like astronomy or polar wildlife, along with supper and a cask of ale. Here's two well-known, that's Professor Peter Higgs, being interviewed by one of his former students. Dennis Canavan, who graduated in mathematical physics, in fact the year after I did at Edinburgh, and he went on to a career, first of all, of course, in teaching. And here is another Nobel laureate, that's Sir Paul Nurse, being interviewed by a first-class broadcaster, Dave Gray of BBC Radio Orkney. Festival events also include upcycling workshops, and I'm wearing actually the product of one of them. And the title of talks matters. Here's some examples. Titles really makes a difference. They vary from The Ship Comes Home and Footsteps on the Moon to Big Bill and the Guns of Alamein, which was about radio technology in the Second World War. The Man Who Read the Orkney Rocks, as you can guess, was about geology, and The Woods Beneath the Waves were about the days of Doggerland, when the North Sea was, as we know it today, the seabed was dry and there were woods and animals there. So titles make a difference, and program scheduling is really important. A program in a good festival should be scheduled in the way that a TV scheduler works. The timing of events. Sometimes events can follow each other in a sequel of similarity, and sometimes, again, like a meal, you can have actually a contrast between one course and another. Chairing can make a difference. Last year in Orkney, we were able to access funding as part of the Year of Young People to train 8 young people, to give them professional voice training by a lady, a top quality voice trainer who has trained some well-known actors on screen and stage. And that meant that we had this team of chairs who really, you could see the confidence and the quality of their presentations, and it added a kind of spark right at the start of a talk. It's important to understand that it's not just about enjoyment and amusement. It's also about substance, but it's about substance, putting the substance in a way that starts with respecting the audience and putting a real effort into the structure of the interaction with them. It's the parallel to what goes on every day in a school when a dedicated teacher puts an effort into structuring a lesson. In a public event, it's like that, taking the substance and putting it in an accessible festival framework. It makes science accessible by going out into a world where people are interested in gardening and history and farming and the weather, and bringing in science in a seamless and enhancing way. And you can see that even in aspects like the cover of the program. So you don't need to put robots or spaceships on the cover of a program. There was a theme of the sea in some of the events in the 2018 festival, and a theme of outdoors and foraging and nutrition, and you want to make it colourful and enjoyable and visually attracting and stimulating. And I just round off by saying it's important, this philosophy of accessibility is important in education now because of the findings published some years ago in this book. Young People's Images of Science. Rosalind Driver and 3 colleagues looked at how pupils actually perceive science. Now the aim is to encourage them to perceive science as a process of questioning, of challenging ideas, of testing. But what they showed was that all too often, under particularly the constraints of exam systems, of curriculum, too often pupils can come out with the impression formed that science is about a body of facts and dogma sustained by unchallengeable authority. Many teachers, of course, know this. They seek to bring in a questioning approach. But it's difficult to do, and there has to be a balance between the basic core knowledge and, on the other hand, the opportunity in a curriculum for the teacher to have some flexibility and exploration. The danger is twofold if pupils come away from science education with the belief that it's primarily about authority. In terms of science, we risk losing future Galileos who challenge established views. We risk having a science which could be brilliant at refining existing concepts, but is not so good at making the kind of fundamental breakthroughs, such as, for instance, the long-awaited synthesis of gravity and quantum theory. And there's an implication for society if people too often accept the written word uncritically as authority, and that is with the extent to which, for example, in social media, things can be, statements can be made and not questioned. So somehow, among all the challenges of science education, it has to provide, amongst the essential body of knowledge and skills, it has to provide these moments of exploration and delight when the world seems new again. And that, as you can see in these images, and that is what science festivals are all about. Here are 3 images. And that is a fish skins tanning workshop, which produce fish skins of the quality and consistency of leather and tanning them with the tannin found in heather and extracting it. And that is a moment of happiness with soap bubbles, moments of exploration and delight, and that is what science festivals are all about. Thank you.